In our first reading, we hear St. Paul list a number of sins and point out how we are set free of those things, how we are to no longer indulge in such things, but be children of the light. And one of those things that he mentions is immorality. And that by itself, sometimes we can just kind of skip over that or just take it in this vague, ambiguous sense. But what actually is meant by that particular word in our first reading? Other translations use the word fornication, and others use sexual immorality. And it can mean, and does mean, two persons who are not married coming together in the marital act. But it can also mean any kind of illicit sexual activity, any kind of sexual misconduct. It can mean things like seduction or rape or sodomy or prostitution. It can mean homosexual acts, any kind of things that are immoral sexual acts is what is meant by immorality there. And we might wonder, well, okay, so that's wrong, but what happens if someone were to indulge in such things? Well, St. Paul tells us, be sure of this, that no immoral person has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. So someone who's constantly indulging in these kinds of sins, they forfeit heaven because they're choosing a different path. And we might wonder, well, why does that happen? Because all of these kinds of sexually immoral sins are distortions of the good that God wishes to give us as human beings. The marital act, the act itself, has meaning, and that meaning is total gift. That meaning is a sharing of persons. But outside the context of marriage, it becomes a lie. Because in marriage, that total gift takes place with the vows, and the expression of that gift takes place in the marital act. But outside of marriage, there isn't the vows, there isn't the exchange, there isn't the willing of the gift of self to another through the vows. And so the action that's supposed to express and complete those vows can't do that because the vows aren't there. And any kind of sexual immorality is a deviation or a distortion of this great gift. The gift of the marital act, the gift of two persons to each other. And so God doesn't want us to have a distortion. He doesn't want us to have an imitation. He wants us to have the actual reality, the truth of it. And in marriage, it is a great and beautiful thing where husband and wife can give themselves completely and totally to each other. But outside of marriage, it becomes a lie. And God doesn't want us to lie with our bodies, with our actions. He wants us to have the fullness of truth. Now, not everyone is called to marriage. I'm not called to marriage. And that's okay. Because God can still fill us with love. He can still lead us to the greatest joy that is Himself. We can still find fulfillment in other vocations. So we shouldn't go for a distortion or an imitation, but seek the path that God leads us to, the path to Himself, the path to heaven. And some people may have made the mistake of falling into, giving in to temptations to these imitations. And the Lord is kind and merciful. The Lord wants to heal us of our woundedness. Whenever we sin, we wound ourselves, we wound our relationship with others, we wound our relationship with God, and He wishes to give us healing. So we have this great sacrament of confession. So anyone who may have fallen to some sort of distortion or perversion or some sort of sexual immorality can still find healing, can still find mercy, can still find joy through the grace that God wishes to give us. And ultimately, He calls us to heaven. So let's not forfeit that goal, but seek it out. Let us prepare ourselves for a taste of heaven as we prepare ourselves to encounter our Lord Jesus Christ in the Eucharist.